What's going on, everybody? So I wanted to take a quick look at the S7 Edge and compare it to the Galaxy S8. And the reason I wanted to do this is because the Galaxy S7 Edge can be obtained for a pretty reasonable price right now, new and used. And if you need a new phone and you don't want to shell out the bucks for an S8, then I would really suggest looking at the S7 Edge. And I'm going to present a case here for that because I think it's still a really good phone. And you'll see in the comparisons that I'm going to do here, it stacks up pretty well against the new S8. So first things first, let's go ahead and look at the raw numbers of the specs of the both phones and compare them to each other. So here we have the specs for both phones from GSM Arena. I'll put links to both of these in the description down below if you want to go through them. I'm not going to cover everything. Like I said, links will be in the description down below. Some of the highlights I wanted to touch upon was the screen size. On the S7 Edge, we have the 5.5-inch display. On the S8, we have the 5.8-inch display. The phones actually have a very similar footprint, with the S8 actually being a little bit more narrow. And the reason it's more narrow is because they've cut down on those side bezels, and they've also cut down on the top and bottom bezels, which allows for this bigger screen to be in a similar size footprint. And that's also one of the reasons we have this aspect ratio, or resolution rather, that is different than the S7 Edge. And this resolution gives us this aspect ratio, which is almost a 2-to-1 aspect ratio. When we do our video comparison, you'll see how that's going to affect video playback. As far as camera sensors go, they both actually have the same sensor. Again, I'll touch more upon that when I do the camera/photo comparison of the two, and you'll see what the differences are there. You'll see we have 4 gigs of RAM on both, but the S7 Edge comes with the Snapdragon 820 versus the S8, which comes with, in the US, it's the Snapdragon 835. And that processor combined with the camera provides a little bit better optimization. The last thing I want to touch upon is this one right here, is the battery. The S7 Edge actually has a bigger battery. The Snapdragon 835 does have some optimizations for power. Android 7.0 on top of that provides even more power optimizations. So you're not going to be hurting with the S8's 3000 milliamp hour battery, but the S7 Edge does give you that extra wiggle room of power in the battery. And both do have Android 7.0. Samsung's done a really good job of keeping these both up to date. For the meantime, they're both running this similar software. The one addition on the S8, which you can see from the little button here, is they've added Bixby. I really don't like Bixby, and I don't use it very often. That's kind of annoying, and I prefer the lack of a Bixby button that is on the S7 Edge. I also prefer the fingerprint sensor on the S7 Edge, which is on the front. On the S8, they've moved it to the back, and they've done this because they got rid of the physical home button to give you more screen space. But the trade-off there is that this fingerprint sensor on the back is just in a really bad spot, and I really wish they'd put it underneath the camera, similar to what the Pixel XL and Pixel did, as well as LG did on their G6. So that fingerprint sensor is in a really bad spot on the S8, and I really prefer the fingerprint sensor on the S7 Edge. However, the capacitive keys on the S7 Edge are backwards from what almost every other Android device maker does, and so the nice thing on the S8, being that we now have soft keys for navigation, is you can actually reorder those keys to your preference, and so I like that a lot better on the S8. And looking at the screen side by side, you see the S7 Edge has a bit of a skewed color palette, whereas the S8 has a little more true to life color. The reds in this shot look a lot more orangish on the S7 Edge, and whites also look a little more pink, whereas on the S8 they're a little cooler and a lot more color accurate. And so as far as color accuracy goes, the S8 is much better. That being said, when the S7 Edge is looked at on its own, it's still a really good, nice looking bright screen. So only when you compare the two do you see that the S8 is better at color reproduction. The one area where the S8 screen will cause issues is how it crops videos. In the case of a super widescreen video, it's not going to really crop them too much. However, in more traditional aspect ratios, you'll see that on the S7 Edge we see more above the person's head that's talking right now, whereas on the S8 it kind of crops off top of his head. And this is more of an issue with videos that are not super widescreen, and most of the time it's not too bad of an issue. The other thing you want to consider is that the S7 Edge's bigger bezels mean you have more area to hold, whereas on the S8 you kind of just have to hold around the edges. So that's kind of a personal preference. Whichever one you think is better is up to you. But again, it will crop some videos. As you can see, this guy being interviewed, he has more space above his head, whereas in the S8, it's kind of cropping off top of his head. and that's going to cause issues on some apps as well, especially when you're playing in portrait mode. It's going to put black bars on top and bottom of apps that are not optimized for that 2:1 aspect ratio, and that might cause an issue on some apps. Me personally, I think it's just a lot cooler to look at an almost bezel-less device, and so I like the S8. But that being said, the screen on the S7 Edge is still really nice, and again, just something to consider when looking at both phones. And I mentioned the S7 Edge being more comfortable to hold when you're watching a video because of the bigger bezels. And that might be more comfortable for some people, and that's, in my opinion, that's one of the only cases where I would say it is definitely more comfortable, or it could be more comfortable. As far as overall hand feel, the S7 Edge does have a distinct crease between the glass and the metal on the sides, and so if you're not using a case, that will dig into your hands a little bit, and that can feel a little bit uncomfortable. And also, it being wider makes it a little harder to handle, whereas on the S8, the glass and the metal on the side kind of flow into each other, and it feels like a one contiguous piece. And so the S8 is much more comfortable to hold overall without a case. Using a case on both devices will alleviate any sort of slipperiness that will come up from them both being made out of glass. However, on the S7 Edge, using a case will also eliminate that sharpness of the edges, causing it to dig into your hands. But overall, the S8 is a little more narrow, and it's a lot easier to use one-handed. If that's something that you really don't care about, and you're pretty much going to use either of these with two hands, then again, something to consider. But if you're going to use it two-handed, then it's not really that big of a deal. So I want to do some comparisons between some photos that I took with both of the phones now to discuss what's going on with the cameras. As I said in the beginning when I was going over the specs, the devices have the same camera. However, the S8 having the newer processor means it can do some more processing on the photos, and which in most cases results in actually better photos. In this picture here, I used auto for both phones, and I did that with all the photos that I took. I used auto, everything HDR was on auto, and in this case I tapped on the tree here to make that my focal point. You see the pictures themselves are both pretty good looking. The first thing that jumps out to me is the color of the sky. On the S8 photo, it's a little more truer to what the actual sky looked like on that day. And on the S7 Edge, just the color's not quite accurate on the S7 Edge. In and of itself, it's a pretty good photo, but it's not until you compare it to the S8 that you see that the S8 is a little more truer to life. So let's go ahead and look at these at full crop. So again, in both cases, like I said, I made the tree my focal point, and on the S8, the shadows are a little more subtle. You can see a little more detail in here as far as leaves, whereas on the S7 Edge, the shadows are a little more aggressive and they're darker, and there's not as much detail going on here. You can see the lines on the brick are a little more detailed on the S8's picture, whereas on the S7 Edge, some of them kind of meld into each other. You can't really make them out as clear. And then again with the color, the brick on the building is warmer colored over here, whereas on the S8, it's a more neutral color, and this is actually more accurate to what the building actually looked like. In this photo, really bright daylight, both take really good photos. The S8, however, takes more color accurate photos when they're both set to auto on everything. So let's go ahead and take a look at a different picture under a different lighting scenario. So here we have a picture of some of my video game controllers. Again, on the left, the S7 Edge, on the right, the S8. The colors on the S8 look warmer, but they're more accurate. That's actually the color of this ottoman. It is like a brownish color, and it looks a lot cooler over here. What's interesting though is the PlayStation button actually looks more detailed on the S7 Edge, whereas on the S8 it looks a little more muddled. Let's go ahead and crop in full crop and see what these look like. So in this case, the S7 Edge, that PlayStation logo actually looks a lot clearer than on the S8. Not really sure what happened there. I used the bottom corner here of the controller as my focal point for both photos, and we still have good detail in both. The texture on the analog sticks looks really amazing, and maybe the lighting just threw the S8 off or something. It was having a not a good day here. So to me, the S7 Edge looks clearer on this picture, even though the S8 is more color accurate. So I thought that was interesting. One other thing worth pointing out, the buttons and the analog stick on the right side here are more clear than the buttons and analog stick on the S8. In this case, I actually prefer the S7 Edge's photo. Let's go ahead and take a look at one more with the rear camera that's under some dark lighting conditions. So here we have a really low light shot, and before I start digging into the details on these, this is a really dark picture. I was surprised that both photos came out as bright as they did. I would be happy with either one of these. So let's go ahead and do, again, full crop on both of these. So in this case, my focal point was Han's little face here. And we see on the S8, we have a lot less noise, and the tone of his face just looks a little more cleaner, looks a little neater. On the S7 Edge, we have a little bit of noise around the edge over here. And then the color itself is a little less accurate. This is more of what he looks like in actual, really good lighting. And then the other thing worth pointing out is the text on the comics back here. The S8 looks a lot better as far as clearness and being able to see the text more clearly. It looks a little more muddy on the S7 Edge, whereas on the S8 it is pretty easy to see what's going on here. So again, really dark lighting conditions. I thought this was a really great photo from both phones. And again, it's not till you compare the two that you see that the S8 does take better pictures, and that's again due to having that newer, faster processor, so it can do a lot better processing on the pictures themselves. So let's go ahead and switch to the front-facing camera. I'm just going to do one of those. Okay, so here we have the front-facing camera on both phones, and the S7 Edge actually has a lower resolution than the S8, so that surprised me that it took a wider angle picture than the S8 did. You could see over here this entire comic book is clearly shown, whereas over here only part of it is shown, and we see more of Homer in the left picture as opposed to the picture on the right. The color reproduction, I would say, is again more accurate on the S8. The wall looks different, and then the yellow on Homer is a little more vibrant, so I would say this one's almost more pleasing to look at, my face excluded, just because the colors on Homer are brighter, and we do see more of the scene in the shot, whereas over here we see less of the scene, and then the yellow, while being again more accurate, is not as flashy and vibrant. So I actually prefer the selfie picture or camera in this case on the S7 Edge. As far as my face and skin tone, again, it's more accurate on this picture over here, and in both cases though, go ahead and do a full crop. So again, we're getting more detail on we get more of the picture, more of the scene on the S7 Edge, whereas on the S8 you can't really see what's going on past Homer here. In this case, I actually preferred the S7 Edge's camera. Both really decent photos. I'm okay with either of these. Not really a selfie guy, but if you're looking at both of these phones, the S7 Edge is definitely, again, worth considering for your selfie consideration. So here we see a side-by-side video comparison. The left side, the S7 Edge video, and the right side, the S8 video. And special thanks to my dog Han for braving the heat outside with me to take this video. I did give him some treats and ice water afterwards. Anyway, the coloring on the S7 Edge, like in most of the photos, is a little warmer. S8 is more accurate. S7 Edge is warmer. As far as the audio quality, I'll go ahead and let you listen to both of those. I couldn't really tell a difference in either one. They were both pretty good at capturing the audio, but I'll go ahead and let you listen to both so you can see just the difference between each of them. So in conclusion, and looking at both phones, I would say the few things that the S8 does better are not deal breakers as far as, if you should choose it over an S7 Edge. By all means, if you need the latest and greatest, the S8 is an excellent phone. But if you don't have to have the latest and greatest and you're looking for something that's going to save you a couple $100s, then the S7 Edge is, in my opinion, a fantastic option. You can find them for pretty good price on Swappa or other sites like that. They're only getting cheaper. Given the updates that Samsung has provided up until this point, I would definitely 100% recommend you getting an S7 Edge if you're looking for a device that is affordable but has lots of great features. There you have it. I hope you liked this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for me, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Instagram. Let me know if you end up getting an S7 Edge over an S8, or if you're looking at making a switch one way or the other. I'd be interested in hearing from you. Till the next one, take care.